Hello, everybody. On behalf of Civic Well, Maven's Notebook, and the Groundwater Exchange, welcome to Office Hours. Our guest today is Ellen Hanak, Senior Fellow with the Public Policy Institute of California, and we'll be diving into the PPIC research on the San Joaquin Valley. My name is Chris Austin. I'm otherwise known as Maven, and I publish the California Water News website, Maven's Notebook. For those of you who aren't familiar, Maven's Notebook is a website devoted to California water news. The website is updated 6 days a week with the latest water news from around the web, including newspaper articles, editorials, commentaries, blogs, press releases, legal analysis, reports, and scientific research, as well as breaking news whenever it occurs. So I invite you to check it out at mavensnotebook.com. And while you're there, be sure to sign up for free daily email service to get the latest news delivered to your inbox every morning. And there's a weekly version as well for those who might want less emails or a recap of the week's news. I also publish the Groundwater Exchange, a website that collects and organizes resources for SGMA implementation. It's at groundwaterexchange.org, and the California Water Library at cawaterlibrary.net. I am assisted this morning by Angela Islas with my webinar. She's with Civic Well, my webinar partner. Civic Well is a nonprofit supporting sustainable solutions and the leaders and communities that implement them. You can learn more at civicwell.org. And we're currently planning future office hour sessions, and we'd like to hear from you. So if you have any topics for future office hours, let us know. Email me at maven@mavensnotebook.com. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be posted at Maven's Notebook and the Groundwater Exchange. A follow-up email with a link to the recording and webinar resources will be sent to all registrants in the next day or two. The email will include a link to sign up to be notified of upcoming webinars, including office hour sessions. So office hours is all about answering your questions. So please enter those questions in the Q&A box located at the bottom of the screen. And if you see a question that you would like to have answered, give it a vote so I know which questions you're most interested in. So I'll start with a short discussion with Ellen, and then we'll get to your questions. But before I do, I just want to alert you to an event tomorrow night hosted by UC Merced, Historical Memory, Policy, and the Future of Water in the Central Valley, which will feature Ellen Hanak and author Mark Arax. That starts at 5:30 p.m. in Merced, and a link to register is posted in the chat. And I am looking forward to that tomorrow. I will be attending myself. So thank you for being with us, Ellen, today. So the implementation of SGMA in the San Joaquin Valley will pose significant challenges. By 2040, water supplies could decrease by 20% due to SGMA and other constraints. In a worst-case scenario, nearly 900,000 acres of farmland could be taken out of production, resulting in the loss of 50,000 jobs and a decline in economic activity by 2.3%. To put this in perspective, this means 1 out of every 5 acres that were irrigated in 2018 would no longer be in production. But that's a worst-case scenario. The Public Policy Institute of California has conducted extensive research on the issues surrounding San Joaquin Valley agriculture and water, and they are optimistic that with the right actions, the region can adapt to a future with less water while simultaneously improving public health and the environment on the fallowed lands. So joining us today to shed light on this topic is Ellen Hanak, a senior fellow with the PPIC. So welcome, Ellen. Thank you for joining us today. So how is SGMA implementation going in the Valley? What are the looming challenges?
So the Valley is we've described it in numerous times as kind of ground zero for SGMA. In some respects, probably what was going on in the San Joaquin Valley is the reason that SGMA was enacted, even though it applies to the whole state. This was a region that was really starting to feel significant consequences from long-term pumping that was exceeding what was being replenished in a lot of the basins around the valley. And that was in fall of 2014. There was there were a few years of just warm up activities involving mainly the Department of Water Resources, getting the basin designations ready and setting up some of the more detailed rules that folks would have to comply with. But the basic story of this law is that local water users were required to get together, form local groundwater sustainability agencies, and then develop sustainability plans and start implementing them. And the deadline for forming those sustainability agencies was summer of 2017. Everybody got in by that time with their sustainability agencies. There's been a little revamping since then, but by and large, and the rule there was you could only be any piece of land could only be in one. There could be more than one sustainability agency within a basin, and the valley has pretty large basins and has many more sustainability agencies than basins. And then the next big deadline for folks was to develop long-term sustainability plans for the critically overdrafted basins, which included 11 of the valley's 15 basins. That deadline was January 2020. By and large, people met that deadline as well. There was a little hiccup in Madera over one of the requirements for submitting was if you were not submitting a single plan for the whole basin, then you had to have a coordination agreement that was signed by all of the GSAs that were submitting separate plans, and that took a little more time in their case to do. But by and large, people met that deadline. That sent the plans to the Department of Water Resources for a review. The state's role is to basically set up what you've got to put in your plans, look at whether you've done an adequate job of that, and then if you didn't, in their judgment, do an adequate job, send it back to you to fix it. And that was what happened for all 11 basins that had that January 2020 deadline. All of those plans were sent back for extra work, and folks had 6 months to do that. That was the statutory limit. They got them back in. And the status now is that DWR has conditionally accepted 4 of the plans for 4 of the basins. It has rejected as deemed inadequate plans for 6 of those basins. Madera is a little bit on a different time cycle for the reasons that I described, and so that's still under a second review. And then there are 4 basins that were not considered critically overdrafted, but still had to comply with SGMA. Basins that aren't critically overdrafted had an extra 2 years to get their plans in. So those plans were submitted in January 2022 and are still under review by DWR. So folks have started implementing those plans. And there's, I would say, a lot of additional work has been happening beyond what's in the original plans that were submitted in January 2020. I think, folks that we had this event in Fresno last week where we had some really excellent panel discussions, and the first panel was kind of a discussion a bit about how SGMA was going, and we had folks representing both a basin that had gotten the conditional acceptance, Kings, who were feeling like, okay, that's a positive for us, and we're ready to just roll up our sleeves and start implementation. And we also had Aaron Fukuda, who is a manager of one of the GSAs within the Kuya Basin. They've been doing a lot there, but they did not get the thumbs up from DWR. So that's one of the basins that's going now to the State Water Board. For them, it's more challenging because they want to be doing their implementation, but they also have to be working on trying to adjust and adapt the plan so that they don't go into state control, basically, which is the risk if your plan is not deemed adequate. you're under then the authority of the state water board. And if the water board doesn't deem that you're doing enough to address what the inadequacies, it has the authority to take over basically management of the basin. And what they've pretty much made clear is that their version of taking over the basin will be a really simple one. It'll just be cuts,
Right.
demand management across the
Yes.
board. Yeah.
Excellent. So you've issued this report and had the event last week. And I think one of the great things that the PPIC does is you take a look at these large issues and you tend to distill them down to some really key points. So what were some of the key takeaways from your report that you just released, managing the transition? I don't have the name.
Right. So this, we've done a number of different studies on water issues in the Valley. We started some in-depth work there in 2016. So soon after Sigma was enacted and well before most of the sustainability agencies were formed. And so we've been looking kind of at the water supply challenges that the Valley faces, at the water quality challenges the Valley faces, kind of looking for, kind of combing through all of the studies that are available on different kinds of water supply enhancement options. We did our own review of the sustainability plans that came out in 2020. And since 2020, we've been really focused on a piece of the puzzle, which has to do with kind of how to manage there's going to be a certain inevitable amount of land that's going to have to come out of production. In 2019, we published a study that looked at called Water in the Future of the San Joaquin Valley, where we looked in depth at a number of the supply options that were available for the Valley in order kind of, if you think about if you've got overdraft, if you've got imbalance long term, the math kind of allows for two things to happen. Either you add more water so that there's less of a deficit, or you reduce how much you're using to kind of get into balance. And, folks in the Valley understandably would like to avoid the demand management side of it because they recognize that it's not about irrigation efficiency. It's really about taking land out of production. And that has to do with the fact that irrigated ag is just a big part of the Valley's economy and the Valley's a great place to grow things if you can irrigate. So it's kind of a key piece of that agricultural economy, and that's where most of the cuts would need to come if there's demand management. And irrigation efficiency has been really helpful in a lot of ways for the Valley, but it's not actually reduced sort of the net water use, because crops kind of still use this pretty much the same amount of water. They might even use more if you can plant more densely with drip irrigation. So folks recognize that demand management means cutting back on acreage. So we looked at the supply side, and we found, kind of looking at kind of all the different options that are out there, we found that probably groundwater recharge is the sort of best bet for augmenting supplies in the sense that there's still some definite options for doing more. The Valley has already been a long time kind of expert area in terms of groundwater recharge, and it has some really world-class examples of groundwater recharge that have been around for a while, but there's more that can be done. And a year like we just came off of is a good example of a year where there's more that you can do in these wet years where there's just more storm water to capture. So that's a big option. There are some other options that can get you something, but probably not as much. a lot of folks are there's a lot of water in the Sacramento Valley. There's a lot more water from big wet years in the Sacramento Valley, but you've got to be able to get it through the Delta and to the valley. So, you know, that's a kind of a big question, I would say. It's not been one that's a cheap solution for the valley if you think about you know the proposed conveyance and things like that. But there are some folks that are planning to invest in Sites Reservoir from the valley. Anyway, long story short, we found that, you know, probably about a quarter of the deficit you could meet with new supplies, and you'd probably have to manage demand for the rest of it. We did some updated work more recently in this report that came out last week, and also in a piece that we published back in February, kind of looking at, okay, well, what would happen if you're able to, you know, on average, bring in 1 million extra acre feet a year. Even in that sort of optimistic scenario, you're looking at about 500,000 acres of land coming out of production. So that's been the focus of our work over the last few years, is like, what do you do with that land? Because everybody is worried about that.
Absolutely. I want to ask you one more question, and then we'll get to the audience questions, because I see we have a number of them in the Q&A. Water trading is one of the tools that the report talks about, but water trading has its challenges, needs to be implemented correctly. Now, you've been writing about water markets in California for some time, and water markets in general. So can you just give us an idea, how is the water market in general going? Because I think we've come a long way since, you know, in the last 10 years, just on water markets and water trading. And then what is that, how can that be applied in the San Joaquin Valley?
So, you know, water trading is, you know, you have to think about water trading as voluntary transactions, willing buyer, willing seller, where somebody who's got water that maybe they have more flexibility about using than somebody else. Like you say, there, you know, we see this during droughts with rice growers in a lot of years have some more flexibility than, say, walnut or almond growers about water use during droughts. They will make that water available on a short-term basis through the market. You'll see that happening over long-term deals. If cities are growing and they need a water supply, they might buy some water long-term from agriculture. So we've had a lot of development over really since the late 80s of water trading, surface water trading in California, and that's both local as well as across regions. What is, you know, and I would say the San Joaquin Valley growers are very active, both especially on the buying side, because it's a water scarce region, but also there are a lot of internal within valley sales, farm to farm sales, as well as folks in the valley purchasing water from Sac Valley growers. And what you are seeing start to happen now with Sigma is the development of groundwater trading as well. California had already some robust groundwater trading in a few adjudicated basins before Sigma, where adjudicated basins are where the rights are well defined and there's a cap on total use. And so if people need water and they don't have enough in their budget, they can trade it. In the case of unadjudicated basins, if you don't have that cap, you don't really have the wherewithal to trade. People might share groundwater molecules, but they're not really managing demand through trading. And Sigma offers that opportunity. We're starting to see that happening. What we look at is how much could expanding surface water trading and developing groundwater trading help the valley manage a water budget. And what we find is that even really localized expansion of localized trading within kind of areas that are, roughly the size of sort of a large groundwater sustainability agency, or maybe a couple of them, that can significantly reduce the cost of managing demand, because it gives flexibility for growers to put the water kind of where on the crops that are going to be generating the most revenues, the most jobs, all of the things that are really beneficial to the economy. If you expand that more and allow trading within basins, that further, kind of reduces the economic hit from demand management. And if you expand surface water trading across basins, again, even more so. And so we just offer that as something that can be an important part of the piece of the puzzle of managing demand. And then we look at some of the concerns that folks have about trading, and kind of look at what some of the potential risks might be, but also are these risks, are we being too fearful? I guess I could say.
Yeah.
And what we find is that, actually trading, if it's done well, can help with some of the kinds of impacts of fallowing and pumping that we otherwise see. And that, those are the fundamental challenges that the Valley faces, are impacts from too much pumping and impacts from fallowing, things like dust, pests, weeds, as well as the economic hit. So, it's one of those things where, like everything in water, it's complicated, but we have the wherewithal to do it well, and it can actually be very helpful.
Okay, great. Well, we've got a number of questions here in the chat, so let's go, and we'll start running them down. Okay, do you have a sense of how much of the demand management or fallowing necessitates bare ground as opposed to native vegetation or cover crops across GSAs in state water board takeovers? So I think he's saying, like, for instance, maybe in like Tulare Lake. Well, I guess this question to me speaks to repurposing. So I guess I'm not sure how to toss that question to you. How much of the demand management necessitates bare ground as opposed to cover crops?
Right. So, this is part of the question that we've been looking at. And, the thing that has people worried about fallowing, there's, first and foremost probably is just the economic hit, right? The fact that means less production, less revenues, less jobs, and all of the spillovers on the San Joaquin Valley economy, for where agriculture is a really important, much more important part of the Valley economy than it is for the state as a whole. But then there are all of the sort of ancillary issues of, if you just kind of haphazardly fallow land and don't manage it, you've got a risk of dust, you've got a risk of weeds and other kinds of pests that can be very harmful for the rest of agriculture. The dust, in a place that already has very significant air quality issues, is a real concern. And the Valley has been making progress actually on dust and air quality over the last decade or more, but this is a real risk to that progress, and so folks are concerned about that. So at a minimum, we're going to have to think about managing dust on these lands, right? But ideally also managing these lands in ways that are reducing nuisance for other folks, for other growers, and ideally doing things with these lands that are providing some benefit beyond just kind of managing the damage. And so that's where we've been looking at kind of the array of options that are potentially out there. One of them that is going to be possible and is already happening, and has potential for it to happen much more than what we're already seeing is solar, utility scale solar. And that's kind of probably the line of use that is going to bring in the most potential revenues on its own. So that's why you're sort of seeing it happen, even if you're not even without incentive programs, or not, I guess there are some tax incentives, but without a lot of government support. The key with solar is making sure you do it in ways that they do have to manage the dust as they're setting that up, but making sure that they're doing that in ways that ideally get you some other benefits, and setting up kind of a pipeline for workforce development, because it can provide some good entry-level jobs. Another area that we looked at is what we call water limited agriculture or water limited farming. Folks had asked us to look at the question of whether or not the Valley could, still do dryland farming the way, I've just been reading in preparation for the event tomorrow in Merced, Mark Ericks's book and his last book, and he goes deeply into some of the history of the Valley. And there was a lot of dryland wheat back in the day, right? It looks to us, and we've done some in-depth research on this, that pure dryland is probably not going to be that viable in most parts of the Valley at this point, just because of the erratic rainfall. But if you can kind of jumpstart the establishment of winter rain-fed crops with a little bit of irrigation to just make sure that the plant establishes, there's a large part of the Valley that could potentially even grow sort of commercially viable forage, for example. And folks like Stuart Wolf are looking at more specialty kinds of crops like agave that require very little water. So that's an area for further exploration. And then there's a piece of that involves the cover crop issue, and sort of, even if you're not managing these lands for sort of production scale agriculture, can you manage them in ways that are going to prevent the nuisances and kind of also kind of help with soil health? And that can be done with very little water. But a key there is going to be making sure that we understand and appropriately credit people for the benefits that provides, as well as not charge them too much for the water that those crops use, because it's true that bear fallow also uses water.
Okay, so now while we're on the topic of fallowing, so another question is, what are some of the ways to deal with negative externalities from the needed land fallowing, and how will we pay for it?
Well, so I think I talked a little bit to the first part of that, and I'll just say there's another couple kinds of land use besides thinking about water limited farming or solar. One is habitat, especially upland habitat, which is not super thirsty. It will require some water to get it to kickstart it, though, probably. And it's right now we're not very efficient at that kind of habitat restoration, and there's a challenge with establishing native plants, partly because they face a lot of competition from hardy or non-native plants, but also just the seed supply chain is not in great shape, and there are questions about who's going to manage it and things like that. But there's some pilots that are starting on, and there's some examples to look to there. And then folks are also looking, and this is not going to be a large land use, but it can be locally important, is some expanding dedicated recharge areas, and ideally doing that in ways that also manage them for habitat. And there, we've got some good examples in the Valley of places where you've got really good recharge coupled with really good habitat. The Kern Water Bank is, the one that I always cite as sort of a real model for that. So there are things to do. Is there money needed for it? That always helps. And California has provided a couple of through a couple of different grant programs, some funding to sort of start with some pilots on this. I always get this
Multi-benefit
multi-benefit land repurposing program, right?
Yeah.
Department of Conservation. That there have been $90 million awarded to a number of different basins, including many in the valley, to basically for GSAs to work with communities and other local partners, in some cases tribes, in some cases, I think in general NGOs are involved as well, to sort of look at what are our options and how do we incentivize it. It's early days, and so there haven't actually been projects on the ground awarded. There's still sort of, in the planning and understanding phase, I think. But you've got some things starting to happen in the Tule Basin. USDA provides the kind of funding that can sometimes be useful for these things as well. And I think we're gonna have to figure out kind of what works, try it, see what we can do at scale, and see how we can do it in ways that are not too costly, either for the folks implementing it or for the grant programs, because it's not realistic, I don't think, to expect the state to just buy it all and take it over, right?
Right, yeah.
So
Okay. Here is another question. It seems many folks, especially ag-res and small to mid-sized ag operators, have a distrust in the data and science being produced by the state or even their own GSAs. Have you seen others facing this distrust, and do you have any examples of success stories about addressing these issues?
So what I can say is that, we've come a huge distance since, even just in the last decade. I mean, it was 2009, Chris, around maybe was that before you got started on this, but you were
2007 I began.
All right, okay. So you were in the business already when there was the big package that included the Delta Reform Act and a whole suite of special session on water and a bunch of bills passed. That was really the first time in 2009 that we got some requirements about reporting groundwater to the state.
Yeah.
And, and that was sort of some monitoring and some groundwater levels and things. So from then till now, the amount of information that we've been able to sort of start to really build to understand our groundwater basins and what's happening in them is tremendous. And I'm not talking about the adjudicated basins. I'm talking about the places that were not managed in a collective way, and that includes the valley for sure. So there were some irrigation districts that were already kind of doing a really good job on their own, and some of the water banks were, but not as a sort of collective, like what's happening in our basin in general. So and the first sustainability plans, one of their big jobs was just to like do their budget, like what's coming in, what's coming out, and so we had, as part of our early work in the valley, done sort of some valley-wide estimates, cobbling together information for the valley as a whole to kind of develop a water budget. And this was work led by my colleague Alvaro Escrivá, who's now at UCLA. And when the first plans came out in January 2020, one of the things that we did was sort of take their numbers and look and see, okay, does this add up? And what we found was that, if you took apples to apples, if you took the same years for all the the same tranche of years for all the plans and compared it with our valley-wide estimates, they were really close. So, I think there's the big picture math of like, the problem, the plans acknowledge that. Where the debates have been are much more around what's that path to sustainability. Sigma gives the GSAs 20 years from plan submission to deadline for getting to sustainability. And it doesn't say exactly what that path needs to be. It does say you cannot cause significant, unreasonable, undesirable results along the way. And that means, impacting groundwater levels in ways that are going to significantly impact other people's wells, causing water quality problems, land subsidence, harm to surface water, including groundwater dependent ecosystems on the coast, also saltwater intrusion, seawater intrusion. So the big debates are around, are the thresholds that the plans have set for, getting there, are they reasonable or are they not reasonable? And this is why a lot of the plans got sent, why the plans got sent back by DWR. A lot of it was around, some of it was around coordination, a lack of coordination within basins, but a lot of it was around some of these undesirable results and the assessment that there was not enough attention to impacts on drinking water wells. There was not enough attention to subsidence. There was, not enough analysis of things like groundwater, surface water impacts, things like that. So, the progress to be made is in that space. And, I think a lot of people were surprised that DWR was as, tough on folks as they were. And there's, another round of plans updates that are going to be due for the critically overdrafted basins in 2025. And the expectation is, continued progress on that.
Okay, great. I'm just going to note here, my friend Diane is asking about the UC Merced event. Will it be recorded? I don't think it's going to be recorded. I will see. I'm going to be attending, and if I can record it and do something with it, then I will. But
I think it will, Chris. Actually.
Oh, okay, good.
It's not going to be live streamed though. But I think
Okay.
I think their hope is to make the video available later.
Okay.
If you can't, but it's better to come live. You want to see Mark.
Absolutely.
You want to see Mark in action.
And also, I should note that I will be attending and I will be covering it at least to some extent in my special newsletter that I send out to my donors and sponsors on every Monday morning. So become a donor, get some inside scoop on California water stuff. Okay.
I just want to say here.
Yeah, I'm working harder on my newsletter this year. So now I'm going to skip down because we have a question here. I usually don't call people out, but this one's a special one. Phil Eisenberg, one of my longtime friends and water policy guys, former chair of the Delta Stewardship Council. And he has a question. So here we go. If we have another wet water year in 2024, will the State Water Board really enforce the law, even if water users argue they can put off the enforcement until there is a drought? In other words, is the governor really interested in enforcement?
Hi, Phil.
Thanks for the question, Phil.
My media training, Phil, I always learned, do not put words in the mouth of a public official. I think you're gonna have to ask the governor about that. But this is one everybody recognizes that one more wet year is not gonna fix this problem. So
and we'll see what the state water board does. I mean, they actually started moving towards, going forward on, intervention to a certain extent, at least to kind of map out a schedule. So,
Right.
you
And
know.
I think I have not met a single person in the valley who would like to see the board take over their basin. So I think we're still in a period of opportunity for folks to be, fine tuning and getting to a place where they can proceed with implementation.
Well, thanks for attending, Phil. Good to see your name on the list. Okay, here's one that's right up your alley. What are the characteristics of the water markets that would be required to protect smaller non-corporate interest in water trading schemes?
So I think a lot of times when people are thinking about this, they're thinking about new groundwater markets that are starting slowly to be created. And there are some of the places that are starting to do this, they're really thinking carefully about this. So Aaron Fukuda in our event last week, and I'll recommend the video is up of that if you didn't have a chance to watch it live. Talked about this. They set up in the Midquia GSA. They have I don't know if it's an advisory group or a steering committee. It's a group that includes growers as well as somebody from self-help. Sonia Sanchez is a member, and other folks in the community to kind of figure out what are the guiding principles for this, and how do we set up guardrails basically. And one of the things that was really important to them was having transparency and having the information be readily available to everybody, which is one of the key things that's important for growers of all sizes, just sort of that you can sort of see what's happening. If you see the recordings of what's bought, what's sold. In a place like in Rosedale, Rio Bravo, there was some pilot development of a platform that got a lot of sort of coverage a few years ago, referred to as a Craigslist for marketing groundwater. And this was a collaboration between the district and EDF to set up something that could work, kind of a prototype of a transparent, again, kind of Craigslist thing where you've got your credits, everybody knows what they've got their allocations. That's the sort of a key part of the groundwater market, and then you can trade it and it gets recorded. And that's a district that has pretty small growers. I think the average size is like, I don't know, something like 40 acres or something like that. So it was important to have something that was transparent. In the case of for small growers for whom English is not a comfortable language, there's probably going to need to be additional kinds of information available and ensuring that at whatever platform is set up is really accessible for folks. And I'm thinking, for example, there's a lot of groundwater using small farmers in the Fresno area, from Southeast Asia, and so a lot, like Cooperative Extension does a lot of work in their local languages for ag-related things, and that's the kind of thing that probably would be key for if there's groundwater trading that would start in a place like that as well. So,
okay, another question. Communities in the San Joaquin Valley are still facing dry wells and contaminated wells. How has the PPIC looked at upholding the human right to water in SGMA implementation?
So, SGMA overnight is not going to be enough to solve this
Right.
problem, right? I think that where Sigma comes in is in not making it worse. And that's what Sigma requires. And there are water quality problems that precede the enactment of Sigma, and that even if we stopped all agriculture, those water quality problems would be there. If we just like left the land alone, those water quality
Right.
problems would be there. So there are other programs that are really important in this context as well. The CV salts program is,
Right.
with sort of a laid out plan for implementation.
That includes
And
replacement water.
exactly.
That's a big part of that program.
Exactly. And then, then I think there are, but this is where sort of Sigma implementation can be helpful in not making things worse by really looking at, kind of understanding well where the wells are, and avoiding, Sigma authorizes GSAs to set stricter pumping limits in areas that are going to be causing disproportionate impacts, whether it's on wells, whether it's on subsidence. So that's a possibility for Sigma as a tool to do. I think, another really promising approach for some communities, and there's no one size fits all on this. It kind of depends a lot on where folks live, the geography, how far they are from other communities and things like that. But the consolidation work that a lot of folks are putting a lot of effort into can be helpful in some places to get folks off of shallow wells and into as part of larger, more robust systems, can be very helpful for drought times and managing that. I think, we're probably one of the reasons that the Kings Basin did get a conditional approval was because that's one of the places where there are a lot of folks on wells, and where there's a lot of wells went dry in the last couple of droughts, and where there were big concerns out of the gate with their groundwater sustainability plans about whether they were addressing that or not. They've come in now with a plan to do something much more serious about this, that in some cases is going to involve direct mitigation of the source of the drinking water, rather than just trying not to make it worse.
So how dominant do you think that agricultural interests have been in the GSAs, as opposed to maybe environmental interests or disadvantaged communities? Do you think they've been playing an oversized role?
This is a tough question to answer, in the sense that
There have been some GSAs, I think, that have really tried to do the right thing with disadvantaged folks and domestic wells and stuff. And then there are perhaps others, maybe not so much.
Well, right. And so, there's a question of, sort of what's the governance structure? What are the, how are the meetings being held? What kind of outreach is happening? I can't answer on behalf, for every
Right.
basin, but I know that in a lot of places there have been efforts, but those efforts maybe have not been as much as they need to be. I think that, the fact that the plans were deemed inadequate or were sent back for homework, a lot of that was around the results for communities. And so it's been, pushing folks to take this more seriously where they maybe hadn't done it as much. I think there's a learning process about what are the best ways to engage communities, given that people are busy.
Right.
They you don't want to burden them tremendously with a whole lot of meetings in their limited spare time in communities. And so I feel like we're on a good path. Let me just say
Right.
that. I will also say ag is the biggest user of water and has to be a very important voice at the table. I mean, so this, they need to,
Right.
community concerns are important, environmental concerns are important, and those are part of the undesirable results that these plans have to avoid causing, and hopefully be looking for solutions that are going to be, create some net benefits. But ag has to be, has to be at the table in an important way.
Yeah, and there are some districts I know that are almost entirely ag, and so it would be kind of difficult for that not to dominate. So I have this is a question from, I think, a homeowner. He talks about Sigma and farmers getting a lot of press and assistance with future repurposing of ag land, but the small domestic homeowner has little to no voice in groundwater issues. The future elimination of heavy-duty diesel trucks will kill the water well drilling and pump repair industry that service thousands of domestic families in California. I've actually heard this somewhere, that these eliminating these diesel trucks is really going to cause problems. So what if they have to drill a new domestic well? And is there a plan to assist the typical rural homeowner if they can't, if they have a problem with their domestic well? Do you know, is there a plan
With
for
respect,
that?
so there's a lot. There was a lot in that question.
Yeah.
I can't speak to the diesel truck issue. That's
Yeah, the
you
water issues creep everywhere.
right, they do. And it's an important, that's a kind of possible unintended consequence that's good for people to raise to carb if there's really not a workaround. But I can't speak to whether that's an insurmountable going to be an insurmountable issue or not. I think what the state has done over the last couple of droughts has been to help provide kind of emergency supplies, and now there are some state grants to help with longer term solutions for, there are a number of different programs, different projects in the valley now and in the pipeline to be helping with drinking water solutions. There are some restrictions on what state money can do for individual well owners, I think, is my understanding, unless that's been changed, and it has to do with sort of a notion of what avoiding what could constitute a gift of public funds. But
well, I also think many GSAs have been working on having a plan for domestic wells, like domestic well rehab plans. I think are also being prepared.
Right. No, that's definitely part of the mitigation plans that the GSAs themselves are looking at, for sure.
There's been some interesting things that some of the GSAs have done, like locating recharge basins close to disadvantaged communities to boost their water supply. So some great work has been going on in some places.
I would say those are, we're in the early days on that still. And one example is down in the Kauai Basin, around near the town of Okieville. There's a partnership between Self-Help and Tulare Irrigation District to do that. And I think they're planning there to really kind of use it as a way to also study, understand the sort of water quality issues, you know, because there's always this challenge when you're recharging in an area that has had nitrogen
Yeah.
applied, whether it's animal
Right.
origin or from a fertilizer bag. You know, do you make things worse before you make things better? So they're going to be looking at that and have some strategies for, you know, kind of pumping out water before it gets to the community if there are impacts that they see coming down the pike and things. And I think, you know, their folks are looking for other good opportunities for that. So it'll be good with this, as with a number of the other kinds of pilots folks are doing on repurposing. These are important things to be learning.
Okay, well, we're kind of getting almost to the end. Let's see if I can find one. Let's see. Last one. Well, I'll go with this one. What I don't hear in the discussions about demand management, repurposing, fallowing is the economic impact on all citizens, not just the ag segment, that will potentially come with less protection of foods and higher costs in grocery stores. So has on-farm recycle recharge of irrigation waters been factored into the purported amount of water used by ag? Well, that's a second question on the back end. But okay, so have we been, when you talk about the economic impact, how far do you extend that? 2.3% doesn't seem so bad when you
Sorry?
The 2.3% doesn't seem so bad.
You know,
in Okieville, it's probably much more than 2.3.
You know, 2.3% of the total economy, that's that if when the US economy drops by that much, we're in a recession, right? So it's it's not I mean it's not cutting the economy in half, but people will feel it, and
much more so in the small towns in the San Joaquin Valley.
And some counties will feel it more, just kind of depending on what the rest of their economy is doing. But what we looked at was the ag production, as well crop production, as well as beef and dairy, as well as all of the downstream food and beverage processing. And we did not make assumptions about prices changing. It is possible that you would see some price impacts on this. At this, ag prices are, for some things, California is a price taker. For some things where California is a major producer, it kind of, our production influences the world price right now. Farmers who are growing almonds and pistachios would probably like to see a little boost in that price, because it's those prices are low, and same with dairy. It will have ripple effects. I can't say that it will have ripple effects per se on the food costs for people in the valley. That they may be that there are a lot of unknowns there, and when you start looking out 20 years, there's so many different, it's hard if we all tried to think and look back 20 years and think of what, look at the valley then to now, we wouldn't have foreseen what the landscape looks like now or what the economy looks like. So it's a little bit of a,
right.
You try to give some sense of things, but
well, it's a lot of changes ahead, but we're California, we're resourceful here, we're innovative. We got lots of great thinkers and lots of technology, and we got a lot of smart people working on these issues. So don't write off the San Joaquin Valley yet.
That I think that's one of our messages, Chris. And the other one is that Sigma is going to be important for the Valley's future. So
Right.
it's going to be a tough pill to swallow, but it's it's going to be important for the sustainability of this region and the economy.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Ellen, for joining us for office hours. And thank you, everyone, for your attendance. And look for a follow-up email in the next day or two. And attend tomorrow if you can. If you can't, then, become a donor and you'll get it in my donor newsletter. Plug. Okay. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you again, Ellen. Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.